Hey there, bud. This is me finally getting around to your video recording, which I'll be uploading to my YouTube and allowing you to code along with me, check out my workflow, see how I fix up your code. I'm going to give you like a basic idea and scaffolding from where to work from, and then I have no doubt that you can probably figure it out from there because you've made some awesome progress. I love checking out your labs and giving you a hand. And again, sorry about this weekend for kind of dropping the ball, but this is me making it up to you. Cool, so let's go ahead and dive in. Your styles.css, only thing I changed was changing this down to 1M. It's not necessary. It just made it so I can fit this this little browser window up here a bit cleaner. I had to size stuff out for my recording here to make that tic-tac-toe board appear above my head in the recording. I had to scale some things down to make sure it fit in that box I allotted for it. Hopefully you can see me typing and doing stuff here in your code. In my code editor, I literally copied over your CSS, so I just changed this. That's all I did. I just made it so I can fit everything into my recording screen easier, so nothing you need to worry about. In your index.html, I don't think this will cause an issue with the dot there, but for fun, for being safe, let's just remove that and call it the center, and that's it. That dot center is a class selector that you would use in something like this right here. A dot center would be, hey, select the class center. So it's redundant having it out here as well, as this word class in front of it makes this selected as a class, aka the dot. So I'm going to remove that for potential redundancy and any issues you might run down to later that aren't behaving correctly. That might clear up anything. So we will go ahead and close our HTML, open up your app, and this is where we're going to do the majority of our work, as you can probably imagine. I opened up your code, and one of the first things I noticed in the browser is that you had the cool little like almost hand-drawn X's and O's. That's really dope. I like that a lot. I clicked around and forced a cats game, nothing happened. If I force a win, nothing occurs. Okay, that's as expected since looking at your code. That's how far you've gotten. Something else I've noticed we're going to have to account for is check this out. If I click in an old space, it overwrites the X with an O and vice versa. And so I think you're using a variable to keep count of what's going on. That's doable. You would have to make sure you do some math to check to see if that board position has already been filled. If so, it still needs to increase the count. And at a certain point, people will have to stop clicking. So like they can't force a draw and keep on clicking and messing up the count for you, right? So you're going to have to universally reset that. But I'm going to show you a couple ways to go around that. And like I said, hopefully give you a workaround and a scaffolding to move forward. So what you have right here is actually really cool. I've seen at least 10 different tic-tac-toe labs, and a lot of people don't know they could do this with a query selector. So good job there. That got us the perfect array that we need here. As a test, I'm going to just console log XO, which, as you know, XO is an array, and an array has a for each method, which is what you used right here on this array. So if we refresh our browser, you see that console log there now. It's a list of all of the index positions of the array. So position 0 is top left. There's 1, there's 2, 3, 4, 7, no, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. So we have all 9 squares starting at 0, going to 8, which is 9 squares, including the number 0. And they're all selected correctly. So that's dope. We are good to go there. Perfect, as a matter of fact. That's what I like to see. So you perfectly added an event listener called XO clicked, meaning any cell is clicked. That's perfect. That adds the functionality that we're going to need to get this sucker going. I am going to go ahead and remove that guy for now, along with I'll leave the count there for now because I'm going to show you how I'm going to think about this. So we're going to call this XO clicked main game function. A click equal is going to be a draw. No, not a draw, because that means there's like a tie. That's not what I'm trying to get at. Well, this is the main game function. I backfire trying to explain that, but that's what's going to happen every single time a cell is clicked. There's going to be a number of things that have to happen, and let's just write them out inside instead of outside. So honestly, the first thing that's probably good to be checked for to see if is the game over. We currently don't have anything to set up to check for that, so let's just make something real simple. If you haven't encountered this yet in JavaScript, it's called a Boolean. A Boolean has 2 values, true or false, and you can check directly, kind of like you would a number against a number. So we can say, is game over equal to true? Therefore, the game's over. We reset the board, and let's show a winning player. So That will be the purpose of this variable. It will be literally just to keep track of, is the game over or not? AKA, we're going to start with false because we're assuming the game's going to start, not won yet, right? So that'll allow us to write something like this. If game over equals true, that means the game is over. Reset the board, show a winner, etc. Right? That's what the purpose of that is right there. Just to reset the board and start a new game. Okay. Now what you're doing here is essentially you're doing a toggle between X and O. And honestly, I always like keeping my functions moved out, almost like abstracted to different levels to make things easy to read where it's happening. So rather than trying to include a million if-else statements in this XO clicked function, which will get very messy, let's just move anything we can out, right? So that's why I left this comment here, because you're going to write a function that's going to reset the board for you, right? And so you can declare it down here and use it in this guy. So this is the main game function. Down here, I'm going to make something called like helper functions, right? They're going to perform a one task for me and return something for me. They're going to do one thing. That's the idea behind writing small functions in JavaScript. So I'm going to declare a new function, and I'm going to call it toggle player because that's exactly what your logic is doing right there. And it's not going to require anything other than count, which is a universal, which is a globally scoped variable right here, so we can access it inside this function, right? So I'm going to cut that. I'm going to paste that like so. And now we're going to say, hey, toggle player, main move. Because every time this is clicked, that's the game function. First off, we check if the game is over, just straight up, easy mode. If it is not, then this is going to be what's happened every move. It's going to toggle the player. So just doing that and refreshing, we should, it backfires. E is not defined, because I'm passing in a target content to this guy, and E when we don't need to. So here is how we are going to circumvent that. I knew I forgot something. So we don't have access to the event because we don't pass one down. We can do that, but there's actually an easier way to handle all this. So where you draw these things, we're actually going to move that out because that's where we need context for E. We don't need it inside this toggle player. So let's say we did something like this. You did e.target text content. What if we just did something like e.target and we did inner HTML like so, or text content, doesn't really matter. And we're going to say draw a letter. But what happens if we want to toggle a variable to do it for us? So this is just another optional refactor. You can figure out the logic otherwise to do so. But I like doing it this way, where we have a variable called current player, like this. Oh my goodness, I can't type today. There we go. And so we're going to have another global variable. We're going to call it current player, and we're going to start it with X. Cool, so it will draw the X, and then it'll toggle. And then assuming this function's done, it'll start back at the top. Is the game over? No. Draw an O, toggle back to X. Next click, is the game over? No. Draw an X, toggle the circle, right? That's the idea behind this guy right now. So I see what you're trying to do with assigning in values and whatnot, but our last Discord message kind of, I think, hopefully clicked the light bulb on for you going, hey, wait a minute. I won't need to do that because we can just do some comparisons here. So we're going to get rid of your targets right there with the values you're trying to work with. This count can work, and let me show you, but it'll run into some problems. So you're saying if the count is divisible by 2, it must be even, therefore it'll be an X or an O move. So if it starts at 0 and X, then current player will need to be, if it's an even move, it should be an X, otherwise it should be, oops, what am I typing? It should be an O. So current player will be reassigned to O, and the count will increase. And otherwise, the count will still increase because you had that logic coded yourself, so it's nothing new. And it'll swap back to X, and theoretically that should work. So going back to our app here and refreshing it, let's see what happens. X, O, X. Dope, okay. We're back to where we were. Refresh, X, X, okay. Should be X, O, X, O, X, O, X, O, X. Functioning as needed, except for this guy right here, still messing us up with the overclick. So actually, before we move on, let's try and fuss with that a little bit. And there is another optional refactor here. We can make this even simpler without worrying about a counting variable. You can actually leave it this way because this is the way you originally had thought of it, so you might want to leave it this way because that's what you understand. But I'm going to show you an even easier and simpler way to do this. Let's remove our counting variable altogether. Because we hardwired this guy to start with x, all that needs to happen is if current player is the value x, then make it O, otherwise make it back to x. And that should function in the exact same way without needing to count the number of moves. Now, if you had planned on, sorry, slowing down to make sure it's actually doing that. This is my test earlier to make sure it was running. There we go. I recognize that pattern. This is a really easy way without having to use a counting variable. It just toggles an x and o back and forth for us using this global variable. No problem. And again, you could leave the count in there if you want to do something cool with your tic-tac-toe game and have some kind of like number of moves before X player won or something like that, or do some kind of cool calculation at the end. Go for it. But I'm just showing you another way to make this even simpler to understand. Cool. So before we get to this main move, we probably should check to see if the spot we're entering is already occupied by some HTML, right? Meaning we don't want someone to click over this X and change it back to O and vice versa over and over again, because that's going to make all of our calculations get thrown off and get totally messed up. So let's say check if space, if a space has been played in, right? That's what we're getting at here. That's the check we're doing. And guess what? It's going to be another if statement. We're going to say, hey, if this current target and its inner HTML is not empty, then we're just going to return and do nothing, because that means we can continue to play the game. If it does have something in it, then we don't want to be able, we want to break out of this function. So what this is going to say is like, hey, we're going to click on a cell. Is the game over? It's still false, so no. It's going to go down here. Is it not empty? If it is empty, then this will this will be evaluate to false, and it'll skip this entire if statement. And it'll come down here, draw an X, then toggle it to circle. Then we start back up again on the next click. It'll click. It's still a game. It's not game over. We come down here, and let's say we try and click on the same cell. If we click on it, it goes, hey, this cell is indeed not empty. So therefore, this evaluates to true. That's what this exclamation point is here. It means not. So is the inner HTML not equal to an empty value? AKA, is there an X or an O already in there? If there is, then we're going to do this return. And return nothing means we're going to break out, and it's not going to fire anything else within this particular function, meaning we can't keep on toggling, so we can't mess up which player is playing, and we can't overdraw anything on our target HTML. So, yeah, there we go. And it's still working. So if we do X, O, X, click a couple times, nothing happens. O, X, O, click a couple times, X, O, X. We got it running. We can't mess up the player toggle. We can't overwrite our own HTML by clicking in the same block. So we now have like a pretty good rule set for the game built out for us. So this gets down to the real heart of the game, is we get to check if it's a draw or a win, right? That's ultimately what's happening. People keep making moves until one of those two conditions is met. So here's how I would probably think about handling it. So after the player is toggled, we should probably run another function that goes, hey, are we going to continue playing, or is this game done? So we're going to call something like, again, I'm just kind of making these up as I go, and that's how I kind of live my life. And this should also just be like a way of describing what the function's doing. So if I came and looked at your code to give you a hand, it's very obvious what's happening, right? Like I can read a function call, I'm like, okay, that's really obvious what he's probably trying to do, and I can go check it out. So let's call it like check if there's a draw or continue playing, right? Continue playing or win or something like that. That's like really obvious, like painfully obvious what it's doing. Check if there's a draw or we're continuing or we're winning. So as you can imagine, we're going to have to declare it before we can actually do anything with it. And it's going to be a function called check, draw, continue, or win. Again, that's just a really long, goofy name. You can make it whatever you want that makes more sense to you. And down here, we're going to say, we're going to run another if statement, as you can imagine. And the idea is if we check top row, middle row or column, right, because it doesn't matter. Because we're going to have one called check middle that will essentially mean check the middle row or check the columns. We can check bottom or check diagonal, right? So top, middle, bottom diagonal should be all the checks we need to run in order to see if there is a winning move currently happening, right? And all else fails, that means it's a draw, as a hint, by the way. So let's just do that. And if you haven't seen this before, you can do multiple conditions in your if-else statements. I've kind of refactored your code now, so I can't see what you had earlier, but you can do check if or this, or you can say check this and this. So two things have to be true for it to fire, or one or the other has to be true or false, right? That's something you can do in JavaScript, which is really cool. So as you can imagine, we might have something called check top, and that's what or is right there, that little double bar, and you do that by hitting shift and backslash. That gets you those guys right there, those bars. And that stands for or. So either check top, check middle, or check bottom, or check diagonal. All of these will fire, and only one has to present itself as true in order for us to say it's a winning move, the game is over, my friend, right? So that's what's going to happen. So this if will say, hey, is going to not return. It's going to just say game over is now the value true, which in the next click we do, well, this will say, hey, the game's done, so we're going to show some results, and we're going to reset the board if we need to, right? Cool. So that's a pretty good start right there. Now we're going to get an error unless we code all of these. And that's what I was telling you earlier, that I'm going to give you some scaffolding and let you work from there. So I'm going to cut that part out because it's going to throw an error otherwise. There is a comment for you that shows you what the syntax would look like once you have them all coded out. Check top and check bottom will be your two easiest, since they'll be very similar. And then check middle and check diagonal will be a bit more tricky, but I think you can figure it out. If not, just hit me up in Discord, and I'll be happy to make another one of these, or we can just talk it out together, and I can give you an idea of where to go. So, as you can imagine, check top will be a function like so. Functions all the way down, doesn't it? You'll get used to seeing this in JavaScript, because you're going to have a lot of functions that do a task for you that return something. So this is the idea you want to think in. How can I make this into a function that I can reuse multiple times if I wanted to? So now that we're going to do a check top check, it's going to do two things. It's going to check to see if there is a winning row and to make sure it's not empty, and then we'll return true or return false. Meaning, if this sucker, if it checks the top and there's no winning move, that means this guy returns false, and then game over is still set to false as well. So we never overwrite game over to say true, meaning the game is still continuing, right? So that's what's going to happen. It's going to do if some kind of check. This sucker is going to return true. Otherwise, no matter what else happens, it's going to return false by default. And so here's where we're going to get even more crazy. We're going to want to do two things. Is there a win? And we're going to make sure that we don't break our code somehow and allow a win when something's not mashed up entirely. Meaning, is also something not empty. And so we can code this either two ways. Either have is empty return false and true, unlike this guy returning true and false, or we can do this, is it not empty? So we have to check, is this thing not empty, and is it a winning move? If both those are true, that means it's a winning top row, aka it returns true. This guy fires as true, and it makes the game be over. We have a winner officially. So that's what's going on here. If there's a winner, and to make sure none of the cells are empty, to make sure we're not breaking our logic somewhere by mistake. And believe it or not, that's all we'd have to do right there for that guy. Now, is win and is empty is going to be something you're going to be using for the rest of your check middle, check bottom, and check diagonal. So these are going to be helper functions that run into these guys. So I'm actually going to write them up here above check, draw, winner, continue, because I kind of want you to think about it like, again, the order doesn't matter, but I'm going to put my more generic helper functions up top and the more specific ones on the bottom. So toggle player is pretty generic, just toggles it back and forth. And then is empty and is win will be used multiple times for these guys. So as you code them downwards in your code here, you'll be using these ones from up here. So let's start with is empty. Is empty, and it's going to take some arguments, but I'll describe what they are as we kind of move through this. It's going to run a check of some kind that says, hey, If any of these if any of these cells are indeed empty, then we're going to return true. It's going to say, hey, yeah, these things are empty, right? Otherwise, it's going to return false, saying no. At least one of these guys has some text in it, meaning they're not empty. So, as you can imagine, by how I phrased that, we're going to do probably 3 checks, and since this is the top row, we have to check the 3 top rows. Well, what are they? I'm hoping you understand by your array here, and me console logging the array in our code, we can highlight the positions in the array, and they're all based on their index position. So the top row is index 0, index 1, index 2, aka position 0, 1, and 2 in the array, the first 3 items. So we're automatically going to assume we're going to pass in 3 cell positions, cell 1, cell 2, and cell 3. And those will be the position of 0, 1, and 2. So you have XO as a universal array, and an arrays can be accessed via brackets. So if we passed in XO 0, it would correspond to that cell. XO brackets 1 will be that guy, XO brackets 2 will be that guy, right? So XO cell 1 is now that cell, and we're going to check its inner HTML. And we're going to make sure that if it is, I think I had too many spaces, nope, is equal to blank, yeah, it's empty, so it's going to return true. That's the idea, right? Now this guy is checking any of those cells. It's just like a backup or redundancy check to make sure none are empty and it's a winning row. So we're going to do OR, because as long as one of these is empty, it's going to say, hey, it's empty. So let's do some copy and paste magic here to make our lives a bit easier, because we're going to check all 3. So we're going to have to do, is the first cell empty, or is the second cell empty, or is the third cell empty? If one of those proves to be empty, return true, otherwise return false. All right, that's set up pretty well there, and we can go ahead and add our arguments here now since I've talked about them being 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, and 2. Which again, 0, 1, 2. Okay, so as you can imagine, isWhen will be very similar. Function isWhen. It's going to be a function that, again, we'll have to check 3 cells together. So cell 1, cell 2, and cell 3. Okay, and it's going to be an if statement that if statement says, hey, if cell 1 has the same value as cell 2 and cell 3, then it's probably a winning row. So it's going to return true. Otherwise, this sucker's going to return false because it's not winning. And this is where the logic will get a little bit different. So XO cell 1 dot, oh my goodness, autocomplete sometimes, I swear, inner HTML. If that is the same value as the cell next to it, aka XO cell 2, whatever cell 2 happens to be, dot inner HTML, meaning is 0, in this specific example, is 0 the same as 1? They are? Dope. So that's 2/3 of the way there to being a winning row. So all we have to do then is say, and is the first cell, you could also do cell 2 if you wanted, this shouldn't matter, and is XO cell 1 the same thing as XO cell 3? Dot inner HTML, there we go. So what that conditional is doing for us is saying, hey, compare 0 and 1. If those 2 cells are the same, we're almost there. And then we're going to compare 0 and 2. So the left and the right, right? Those are the left and the right, correct? If those are also x's, that means all 3 are x's. Therefore, it's a winning move, return true, and then we're going to report back that it's indeed false. And this is also where you want to display some results, because this confirms a winning move, so it makes sense to also have this display the winner. So in your index.html, you can see I've already added a paragraph tag right here with an ID of results, which will give us the ability to do this on the global scope here. Let's say let our variable called results is going to be the document, our HTML document. We're going to get an element by its specific ID, aka results. And unlike the query selector, it doesn't give us an array. It just gives us the one guy, so we don't have to mess with any kind of index selecting, right? And it's results. Okay, results. So now we have access to results inner HTML, which is actually the p tag, the paragraph tag, if you will. So in the when, right before we return true, because anything after the return won't fire. The return means done. So we have to put it above the return statement for it to work. So we can just say results.inner HTML. It's going to be a new value of HTML, which will be, let's say, whatever the value of cell 1 is. So cell1.inner HTML, which will be an X or an O, whatever it's going to be. If it's a winning X, it'll print out X. If it's a winning O, it'll print out O. That way we don't have to do any kind of weird logic with your count or double check the current player is ahead or behind of the clicks. We don't want to care about all that stuff, so we're just going to make it easy, and this is the lazy solution. That's my favorite solution. And then we're going to do some string concatenation that will be like, is the winner, right? Real simple. So we have to double check our code here. So isWhen also will be like, hey, 0, 1, and 2, aka the top row. That's what this function does. It checks the top. Is 0, 1, and 2 winning? And let's make sure they're not actually empty to make sure our code's working a-okay. This is kind of redundant for this low-level application, but again, it's a good idea and concept to be aware of that you want to have in your larger scale applications and how people typically break out their code logic. So I'm going to refresh our page here. And barring a super mess up somewhere, I think this should fire off correctly. So I'm going to force a win, see what happens. X. Hey, dope. X is the winner. We did it, boys. Of course, the code's not figured out yet, so you can still click in there. Matter of fact, and then it doesn't recognize a loss, which is dope. And we haven't coded the diagonal yet, so there's no check for that. But I'm hoping this is enough of a starting point that gives you an idea of where you need to go from here. So you can start adding in your or and then check bottom. So you can do or check bottom and then write what check bottom is going to be down here. And it'll give you the scaffolding. So you're going to do another is when and another is not empty. And they'll be the same again for check bottom. Meaning the bottom, if you console log XO, this is how I'm accessing this, by the way. I console log XO, and it's an array of HTML elements. So I can actually expand the array in my console developers tools here, and highlighting the element will highlight the corresponding one. So as you can imagine, you want to check 6, 7, 8 for the bottom maybe. And for a diagonal, you could check 2, 4, and 6. So play around with that, try and get it working, and let me know anywhere you get stuck, and I'll be happy to help you code along. But hopefully this isn't too confusing, and this gives you a great starting off point for the rest of your adventure. Thanks.